You're just the librarian, stay out of family matters. That was what they always told Ivy. Cold eyes, dismissive tone. No one looked twice at the quiet woman cataloging rare books behind the locked glass doors of the Whitmore Estate Library. To them, she was invisible, paid to shelve dusty secrets, not uncover them. But what happens when the forgotten librarian finds the one secret that could dismantle a powerful family? What if the servant girl was actually the rightful heir, because hidden behind a false wall buried under decades of lies, Ivy found a journal, her father's journal, and a will that was never meant to see the light of day. Ever felt like the outsider, until you found the truth that could burn it all down. Drop a comment, hit that like, and subscribe, because this revenge family story will leave you shaking. For as long as Ivy could remember, her place had been clear behind the scenes, behind the shelves, behind the legacy of the Whitmore name. She was hired at 21 to maintain the private library of one of the wealthiest families in Massachusetts. But Ivy was no ordinary employee. Unbeknownst to anyone, she was the product of an affair between Martin Whitmore, the stoic patriarch of the Whitmore dynasty, and a quiet, artistic woman who never demanded recognition, only survival. Her mother had passed when Ivy was 17, leaving her only a silver locket and a warning: they must never know who you are. So Ivy stayed silent. She watched the Whitmore family celebrate birthdays, host charity galas, and toss around millions like it was pocket change. She was polite, invisible, but Ivy wasn't there just to sort books. She was waiting, watching, collecting truths like puzzle pieces. And the truth she finally uncovered wasn't just a game changer. It was nuclear. Ivy didn't change her name. She changed her fate. Ivy never belonged, but she never asked to. She grew up in a 2-room apartment above a thrift store, raised by a single mother who spent her days sewing dresses and her nights staring out the window like she was watching a life that had once been promised to her. Ivy's questions about her father were always met with silence, or worse, a tired sigh. He's someone you're better off not knowing, her mother would whisper, folding laundry with trembling hands. But children feel absence like hunger. Ivy learned to survive with half a story, always sensing something wasn't right. She wasn't like the other kids in the neighborhood. Her eyes were too sharp, her posture too composed, her obsession with order and beauty too strong for the chaos around her. There was a cold, unspoken refinement to her that didn't come from poverty. It came from blood. When Ivy was 17, her mother died of a heart attack. Alone in the hospital room, Ivy sat beside the woman who'd given everything but answers. In her hand, her mother pressed a locket cold and delicate. Inside, a tiny photograph of a man Ivy had never met, and the initials M.W. Martin Whitmore. A name Ivy would never forget. She didn't storm the mansion. She didn't make demands. Ivy did what she was trained to do. She studied, researched, waited. At 21, she applied for a position in the Whitmore estate as a librarian's assistant. The original librarian had recently passed, and the family needed someone to manage the vast collection of rare books, journals, and historical documents their ancestors had accumulated over generations. Ivy slipped in through the back door, literally and figuratively, and no one paid her any mind. To the Whitmores, she was just another employee, quiet, modest, forgettable. Ivy made herself small. She dressed plainly. She rarely spoke at staff dinners and avoided eye contact with guests. But behind that invisibility, Her mind was in overdrive. She studied Martin Whitmore from a distance. Now, in his 70s, he was a guarded, principled man, rarely seen in public. His wife Eleanor was the true force behind the family's empire, powerful, polished, and calculated. Their children, raised like royalty, had never worked a day in their lives. Charity boards, fashion weeks, gallery unveilings. They were rich idle and completely unaware that the woman quietly restoring antique manuscripts downstairs carried their blood. The library became Ivy's sanctuary, a place of silence, of secrets. She memorized every floorboard that creaked, every book that was never borrowed, every keyhole that led to something off limits. But it wasn't until year 3, after she'd earned the family's trust, that she discovered the hidden chamber. It was behind a false shelf in the northern wing, an old mechanism triggered by pulling out the 3rd volume of Plutarch's Lives. Inside was a temperature-controlled room lined with family journals, confidential correspondences, and legal documents. That night, Ivy read until her eyes burned. One leathers-bound book stood out. It was Martin's personal journal, handwritten in meticulous cursive. The entries ranged from philosophical musings to deeply emotional confessions. Then she found it an entry from nearly 30 years ago. She was the only woman I truly loved, but I was a coward. I chose legacy over truth. Ivy is my daughter. I see her eyes in my dreams. I wanted to claim her, but Eleanor said she'd destroy them both. So I stayed silent. I let them disappear. Forgive me. Ivy stopped breathing. He knew. All along he knew. And then she found the will, dated 5 years before his official one. Sealed. Signed. Stating clearly, if any illegitimate child of Martin Whitmore were to be identified with credible evidence, they were to inherit all of Martin's personal intellectual property, including royalties from his publications' patents and his ancestral library archives' assets, estimated to be worth tens of millions. The weight of it crushed her. Not because of the money, but because it proved she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just the librarian. She was his daughter. She mattered. But this will had never been filed. Why? She didn't need long to guess. Eleanor Whitmore. If there was anyone capable of hiding a legal document, destroying it, even it was her. Ivy had seen the way Eleanor operated. The whispered conversations, the bribes, the cold glances at anyone she deemed unworthy, and so Ivy finally had her answer, but no justice. Worse, she now held a weapon that could implode the entire Whitmore legacy. But what was she going to do, march in with a dusty will and a blood claim they would crush her? Unless she did it publicly, strategically, irrefutably. And fate, perhaps karma, was about to hand her the perfect opportunity. Because Eleanor had just announced a high-profile charity auction at the estate, and Ivy had a plan. The annual Whitmore Charity Gala was not just an event. It was a performance. Held in the grand ballroom of the estate, the night gleamed with crystal chandeliers, live classical music, and guests dressed in gowns and suits that cost more than Ivy's annual salary. Celebrities, socialites, politicians. They all gathered under the illusion of benevolence, sipping champagne while bidding on philanthropic relics donated by the Whitmore family. This year's theme, legacy through literature. Irony, Ivy thought, had a wicked sense of humor. For weeks, she planned in silence, building the moment, thread by thread. She digitally backed up the journal entries, made copies of the unfiled will, and prepared documents that could pass any forensic verification. She also reached out anonymously to a well-respected journalist with everything she had under one condition: wait until the moment I say go. What no one knew was that the centerpiece of the night was going to be Martin Whitmore's final unpublished manuscript, a collection of his private writings he curated by Eleanor to auction for millions. It would be unveiled on stage by Eleanor herself, in a symbolic passing of the torch to her oldest son, Gregory. But Ivy had rewritten that script, literally. The day before the event, while overseeing final cataloging of the books, Ivy switched the curated manuscript with the one she had assembled, one that included journal entries never meant to be seen. Pages where Martin confessed his affair. Pages where he mourned the daughter he was forced to abandon. Pages that said her name. Ivy. She didn't sleep that night. She barely breathed the next morning. But as the evening lights flickered on, and the orchestra played the overture, she stood in the back of the ballroom in a tailored navy gown, her lanyard badge tucked into her clutch, her heart pounding like a drumline. When Eleanor took the stage, applause erupted. She was poised as ever, dressed in a pale silver dress and dripping in diamonds. She smiled, for the cameras introduced the event, and spoke of her husband's literary legacy with the elegance of a queen. Then came the unveiling of the manuscript. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, holding up the leather-bound volume, "this is the last work of my husband, Martin Whitmore, a brilliant private man who gave his life to truth and scholarship." The crowd leaned in. The bidding began immediately: $100,000, $250,000, climbing, until the moderator, a young auctioneer flipping through the pages for effect, suddenly paused. He blinked, then frowned. "What the—" he whispered to Eleanor. She reached for the manuscript and read a few lines. Her face drained of color. Whispers rippled through the audience. On the stage monitor, the projector displayed an enlarged excerpt, one Ivy had highlighted in gold leaf. "Her name is Ivy. I watched her from afar, but she doesn't know I exist. Eleanor said she'd ruin her if I ever came forward. I'm a coward. I let my daughter grow up believing she was nothing. But she is everything. She is my blood, my only true heir." Gasps filled the room, and then Ivy stepped forward. She didn't march. She didn't scream. She simply walked through the crowd with the steady grace of someone who knew exactly who she was now. I believe she said into the microphone, calm but unwavering, "There's been a mistake." The room froze. "My name is Ivy Whitmore, and I am the daughter Martin wrote about, the rightful heir to everything listed in this manuscript, and more." Security moved, but not toward Ivy. They turned to Eleanor, who was now visibly trembling. Ivy pulled a folder from her clutch. These, she continued unfolding copies of the hidden will, are legally notarized documents signed by Martin Whitmore, 5 years before his final will documents that were never filed. I have reason to believe someone deliberately suppressed them. She turned to Eleanor. I believe that someone was you. The silence was deafening. Then a flash went off, then another. Then chaos. Reporters swarmed. The live feed continued broadcasting. Gregory tried to intercept the documents, but was stopped by 2 legal observers who had been tipped off by Ivy's anonymous journalist, now present in the room, capturing every second. Eleanor's voice cracked for the first time in years. "This is absurd. She's nothing but the librarian." "No," Ivy replied. "I was your librarian." "But I was his daughter. And now I'm the one holding the truth." The fallout was immediate. The manuscript bidding was cancelled. News of the scandal trended within hours. The press labeled it the Whitmore Air bombshell. But the twist, the one no one saw coming, came the next morning. Martin Whitmore, though frail and reclusive, watched the entire event via live stream. And that night, he requested to see Ivy. It was the first time she heard his voice. "Ivy," he rasped, tears rolling down weathered cheeks. "I prayed one day you'd find me. I never stopped thinking of you. I'm sorry it took a war to bring you home." She didn't cry. Not in front of him. She held his hand. "I didn't come to destroy the family," she said quietly. "I came to take back what was mine." They didn't come at her all at once. The Whitmores were too elegant for that, at least at first. The backlash began with cold stares, snide whispers, a carefully crafted press release from Eleanor's legal team denying the legitimacy of the will and claiming Ivy had manipulated an aging man in declining health. The statement described her as a disgruntled former employee with delusions of grandeur. But Ivy didn't flinch. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The truth never was. Still, what she didn't anticipate was how deeply the Whitmores would dig, how far Eleanor would go to erase her. 2 weeks after the gala, Ivy was fired from her position at the estate. No formal notice, just an escort off the property. Her access to the library was revoked. Her name was scrubbed from internal communications. The journalist who once promised to help went silent, clearly bought off or threatened. News articles stopped mentioning her. The internet, once ablaze with the secret daughter, began shifting focus to Eleanor's elegant recovery. It was all being rewritten. Even Martin, after that one emotional meeting, slipped back into silence. Whether from guilt or pressure, Ivy never knew. He refused to take her calls. His assistant simply said he was resting. The isolation was worse than she'd imagined, because now she wasn't invisible. She was a threat. She walked into stores and saw people glance away. She opened her email to anonymous messages, gold-digging fraud. "You're nothing." Even her bank account froze temporarily due to a pending investigation. But the worst came on a Tuesday morning when Ivy received a package with no return address. Inside was a flash drive. On it, photographs, dozens of them, of her mother, in grainy black and white time-stamped invasive photos from the 1990s, clearly taken without her consent. Her walking home, her shopping for groceries, her sitting alone in the hospital waiting room just days before her death. One photo had a note taped to it. 5 words typed in caps. She knew her place. Remember. Ivy's hands trembled as she clutched the photos to her chest. She curled into herself on the floor of her apartment, feeling 13. Again alone, again forgotten again. They were sending a message. You may have blood, but you don't have power. The rage that followed wasn't sudden. It didn't scream or punch walls. It was quiet, cold, heavy like iron in her bones. A rage that came from being hunted in silence, the same way her mother had been. A rage that whispered, "They will never stop until you stop them." And for the first time in her life, Ivy stopped playing fair. She hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, the one who specialized in estate disputes involving generational wealth and suppressed heirs. A woman named Camille Dunn, who had taken on families like the Whitmores before. Ruthless, brilliant, and expensive. Ivy sold her car to afford the retainer. She handed over everything: documents, journal scans, call logs, the flash drive. Camille took one look and said, "They're scared of you. That's why they're trying to break you. You don't fight fire with manners, Ivy. You fight it with court orders." Lawsuits were filed. Press attention reignited. Not because Ivy begged for it, but because Camille leaked the abuse of power angle. Photos of Ivy's mother reappeared. Questions arose. Why was a woman surveilled for decades? Why was a legally binding will hidden? Who benefits from her silence? But the Whitmores fought back harder. Gregory Whitmore, now the unofficial heir, went on national television crying over how a stranger had manipulated his ailing father and ruined their family's good name. He said Ivy's claims were unproven and that her actions endangered Martin's fragile health. It worked. For a while. Then Martin died. No warning. No closure. A quiet announcement in the paper said he passed peacefully in his sleep. No funeral. No public statement. The Whitmores cremated him immediately. Ivy wasn't invited. She stood outside the gates of the estate, in black, staring at the house she had once catalogued with reverence, and now behind those ivy-covered walls, her father's ashes sat on a mantle she would never see. Tears welled up, but not just grief, not just pain, betrayal. She had spent her life trying not to be angry, trying not to take up space. She had accepted scraps of truth and learned to be thankful for them. But no more. She wasn't the girl behind the bookshelf anymore. She was his daughter, the one he knew about, the one he wrote about, the one they feared. That night, Ivy stood in front of a mirror and looked herself in the eyes. No more shrinking, no more silence. It was time to claim everything they said she couldn't have, and everything they tried to bury with him. After Martin's death, Ivy disappeared for a while. Not in the way Eleanor wanted erased and forgotten, but deliberately, intentionally. She packed a single suitcase and left the city boarding a train jammed north with no destination, announced just a notebook full of questions and a heart scorched by betrayal. She stayed in a quiet coastal town in Maine, renting a room above a bookstore that smelled like cedar and sea salt. For the first time in months, there were no cameras, no press, no lawyers knocking on her door. The silence was jarring but also healing. There, Ivy stopped being a headline. She walked along the cliffs every morning, watched the tide crash against the rocks, like it was trying to erase something it could never forget. And in that rhythm, that endless push and pull of the ocean, she began to understand something about herself. She had been trying to belong to a world that had no room for her, a world built on curated legacies and polished lies, a world that didn't mourn her father when he died, but protected the name he left it behind, like it was property. But Ivy wasn't property. She wasn't a shadow or a scandal or a footnote in someone else's history. She was her mother's daughter, and her mother never begged to be included. One afternoon, as she was organizing old poetry books for the store owner, a warm, gray-haired woman named Evelyn, something fell from between the pages of a forgotten anthology. A letter unopened, dated 7, addressed to Ivy in shaky cursive. Her breath caught. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. My Ivy, if you're reading this, it means I'm already gone. I don't know how long you'll carry the weight of not knowing who you are. But I want you to know this. You were never a mistake, not even for a second. I didn't protect you from the truth to hurt you. I did it because I wanted you to have peace. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe peace isn't something we're given. Maybe it's something we take back. Don't let them write your story. Not when you have a voice. Not when you carry fire. Make them remember you. Mom, Ivy stared at the words, her throat tight. It was like her mother had seen this moment coming, like she knew that one day her daughter would face the same storm and have to choose whether to run or rise. That night, Ivy lit a candle, opened her notebook, and made a list. Not of revenge, not of people to destroy, but of things she wanted to build. She called Camille the next morning. "We're not just suing for the will anymore," she said. "I want full rights to the Whitmore archives. His writings, his patents, everything tied to his name. Not because I want the money, but because I want the truth back." Camille paused. "They'll come after you again. Harder." "I know," Ivy said, "but this time, I'm not walking into court as a lost girl begging for recognition. I'm walking in as a woman who knows who she is." Camille exhaled slowly, then smiled. "That's the Ivy I've been waiting for." Later that week, Ivy held a private press conference at a university library far from the Whitmore estate, but fittingly surrounded by books and knowledge. She stood in front of reporters and scholars and announced the formation of the Ivy Foundation for Literary Truth, dedicated to protecting suppressed works, lost authors, and forgotten voices. "I grew up thinking I didn't matter," she told the crowd, "because people in power convinced me silence was safer than truth. But silence didn't save my mother, and it almost destroyed me. So I'm choosing something else, now legacy, with honesty." The speech went viral. But this time the response was different. Ivy wasn't portrayed as the scandal anymore. She was the underdog turned architect. Universities reached out. Authors praised her. Former Whitmore staff sent private messages of support. She was becoming something bigger than her past. Not a Whitmore, but a name of her own. The courtroom was full. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the media from crowding the steps, waiting for the moment Ivy Whitmore, no longer just a name, whispered in scandal, took the stand. Dressed in a sleek black suit, Ivy sat tall as her lawyer presented the case. Forged legal documents, financial manipulation, and a long-term pattern of estate suppression. They brought in experts to verify Martin Whitmore's handwriting in the original will. They brought in forensic analysts to confirm the timeline of suppression. And then they brought in Martin's former legal aide, who under oath admitted Eleanor had pressured him to lose documents that could jeopardize her children's inheritance. It was a bombshell. And when Ivy took the stand, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply told the truth. "I didn't want to destroy their legacy," she said. "I wanted to claim my own." The verdict came swift. Ivy was awarded full rights to Martin Whitmore's intellectual estate, retroactive royalties, and legal ownership of the family's private archive. Eleanor and Gregory were publicly censured and ordered to pay restitution for years of concealed assets. In a matter of days, the woman they'd once dismissed as just the librarian became the legal owner of the very estate they tried to bury her beneath. But Ivy didn't stop there. She donated half the archive to public institutions. She opened the Whitmore Library, renamed the Ivy Whitmore Collection, to students and researchers. and she established scholarships for children born outside of privilege. When a reporter asked her what revenge felt like, Ivy smiled softly. "This isn't revenge," she said. "This is restoration." Months later, Ivy stood alone on the steps of the new Ivy Whitmore collection. The morning light filtered through the glass facade, casting long shadows across shelves filled with knowledge, truths that no longer had to hide. The building didn't just house her father's legacy. It held her mother's silence, her own resilience, and the story of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. She no longer needed a seat at their table. She'd built her own. There were no more letters to chase, no more names to prove. Ivy had stopped fighting to be accepted and started living as someone who accepted herself. She didn't change her blood, but she rewrote what it meant. She was not a secret, not an accident. She was chosen by herself. And that was enough. So, if you've ever been pushed aside, if you've been told to know your place, remember this. Your place is wherever you choose to stand. If Ivy's story spoke to something inside you, share it below. We all carry untold stories. Don't forget to subscribe, and tell yours, because healing begins with truth.